2 weeks before I was supposed to marry the woman I loved, I found out she had been living a completely different life behind my back. The strange part is that the moment I uncovered the truth wasn't actually the worst day of my life. The worst day was every single day before that, when I was trusting someone who looked me in the eyes, smiled at me, planned a future with me, and secretly knew that future would never happen. If you're listening to this because you've ever wondered whether ignoring your instincts is worth it, let me save you years of heartbreak. It isn't. My name is Ethan, I'm 31 years old, and for most of my adult life, I thought I had everything figured out. I had a stable career as a project manager for a construction company. I wasn't rich, but I earned enough to live comfortably. I owned a modest townhouse in a quiet neighborhood, drove the same reliable truck I'd had for almost 7 years, and believed success wasn't measured by expensive cars or giant houses. To me, success meant coming home to someone who loved you. For almost 6 years, I thought I had found that person. Her name was Claire. People used to tell us we looked perfect together. Looking back, it's funny how everyone only sees the highlight reel. They don't see the difficult conversations, the silent car rides, the tiny cracks that slowly spread beneath the surface. From the outside, Claire and I looked like the couple everyone secretly wished they could be. We met completely by accident. A mutual friend invited both of us to his birthday barbecue. I almost didn't go because I'd been working overtime all week, and honestly, the last thing I wanted was to spend a Saturday pretending to enjoy small talk with strangers. But my friend practically dragged me there, promising there'd be good food and even better company. He wasn't wrong. I noticed Claire before we ever spoke. She wasn't trying to be the center of attention. She was standing off to one side, laughing with a group of friends while trying to keep a little girl entertained by making funny faces. There was something genuine about her smile. It didn't seem forced or rehearsed. It reached her eyes. Later that afternoon, I somehow managed to spill barbecue sauce all over my own shirt while trying to carry 2 plates at once. Claire laughed so hard she almost dropped her drink. I looked at her and shrugged. Well, I wanted everyone to remember me, she smiled. Congratulations, mission accomplished. That one conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. The next morning, I found myself hoping our mutual friend would invite us both somewhere again. Instead of waiting, I asked him for her number. He teased me for almost 5 minutes before finally giving it to me. I stared at my phone for nearly an hour before sending the first message. Hi Claire, it's Ethan. The guy who lost a fight against barbecue sauce. She replied less than 2 minutes later. I was wondering when you'd text. That single sentence made me smile like an idiot. Our first date was simple. Coffee, no fancy restaurant, no expensive gifts. Just 2 people talking for almost 4 hours. Without noticing, the cafe was preparing to close. Conversation never felt difficult with her. We talked about childhood memories, embarrassing teenage stories, favorite movies, dreams for the future, and places we wanted to visit someday. Every answer she gave somehow made me want to know even more about her. After that came more dates. Then weekend road trips, movie nights, meeting each other's families, birthdays, Christmas dinners, little traditions that slowly became part of everyday life. Before I realized it, she wasn't just someone I was dating. She had become my best friend. 3 years into our relationship, we moved into the townhouse I'd recently bought. People always warn you that living together changes everything. They're right. It shows you the real person, or at least that's what I believed. Claire loved Sunday mornings. She'd wake up before I did, make coffee, and open every curtain in the house because she hated dark rooms. I'd usually complain about the sunlight hitting my face, and she'd laugh before pulling the blankets off me. Come on, she'd say. You're wasting the day. I used to pretend I was annoyed. Truthfully, I loved those mornings. She had a habit of singing while cooking, even though she couldn't carry a tune to save her life. Whenever she tried baking, flour somehow ended up everywhere except inside the mixing bowl. She cried during emotional movies. She rescued injured birds. She remembered birthdays better than anyone I'd ever met. There were hundreds of tiny things that convinced me she was exactly the person I wanted beside me forever. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if those moments were real, or if I only remember them that way because I wanted our story to have a happy beginning. 5 years after we met, I proposed. I'd spent months planning everything. Claire had always talked about wanting something private instead of a huge public proposal. She hated attention. So one weekend, I took her to the same beach where we'd watched our first sunrise together years earlier. It wasn't some luxury destination, just a quiet stretch of coastline where the waves drowned out every other sound. We walked along the shore until sunset painted the sky orange and pink. I remember my hands shaking so badly, I almost dropped the ring before getting down on one knee. She covered her mouth with both hands. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then I asked the question I'd been rehearsing for months. Will you marry me? She started crying before I even finished speaking. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, of course I will. People nearby clapped. I barely noticed. All I could see was the woman I believed I'd spend the rest of my life with. The next year disappeared in a blur of wedding planning. Neither of us expected organizing one day to require so many decisions. Venues, flowers, music, photography, guest lists, invitations, cake tastings, color palettes I'd never even heard of before getting engaged. Somehow, every weekend became another wedding appointment. It was exhausting, but it was the kind of exhausting that felt worth it. Every completed task meant we were one step closer to becoming husband and wife. Our families couldn't have been happier. My mother absolutely adored Claire. She often joked that if I ever messed things up, she'd probably keep Claire and get rid of me. Claire's parents treated me like a son. Her father and I spent weekends watching football together while pretending we weren't both letting her mother win at board games. Everything seemed normal, perfect even. That's probably why I ignored the first warning sign. About 6 weeks before the wedding, Claire started bringing her phone everywhere. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone carries their phone these days. But then I noticed little things. If she left the room, the phone came with her. If she went to shower, it went into the bathroom. If it buzzed while we were watching television, she'd glance at the screen and quickly turn it face down. One evening, we were making dinner together. When her phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, she immediately grabbed it, almost instinctively, so quickly that it caught my attention. "Everything okay?" I asked. She smiled. "Just work." I nodded. She worked in marketing. Late emails weren't unusual. Still, something about her reaction stayed with me. A few days later, I woke up around 2 in the morning and realized she wasn't in bed. I walked downstairs expecting to find her getting water. Instead, I saw the back door slightly open. Claire was standing on the patio. She was talking quietly on the phone. When she noticed me through the glass, she ended the call almost immediately. "You scared me," she said as she came back inside. "Who were you talking to?" "My co-worker Melissa." "At 2 in the morning?" She laughed awkwardly. "She's going through a breakup." It sounded believable enough. I kissed her forehead. "That was nice of you." She smiled. "I know what it's like to need someone." I never questioned it again. Not then. Another week passed. The wedding was now less than a month away. Invitations had already been sent. Relatives were booking flights. The honeymoon was fully paid for. One evening, while we were eating dinner, Claire suddenly mentioned that work had become overwhelming. "My boss wants me leading another campaign before the wedding." I frowned. "Seriously? That's terrible timing." She sighed dramatically. "I know. I'll probably have to stay late a few nights." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "After the wedding, things will calm down," she smiled. "I hope so." For the next 2 weeks, staying late became normal. Sometimes she'd get home at 8, sometimes 9, occasionally even later. Every time I asked how work was going, she'd tell me the same thing. "Busy." I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? Trust isn't something you switch off overnight. Trust is built one honest day at a time. Or at least that's what I thought. Then one Tuesday afternoon, while sitting at my desk reviewing construction schedules, my phone buzzed with a notification from social media. It wasn't from anyone I recognized. The account had no profile picture, no friends, no posts, just a single message. I almost ignored it. I wish I had. Or maybe I wish I'd opened it sooner. The message contained only one sentence. "If I were you, I'd find out who Claire has dinner with every Thursday." I stared at the screen over and over again, trying to convince myself it had to be some kind of cruel joke. But deep down, for reasons I couldn't explain, something inside me suddenly felt very, very cold. I must have read that message 50 times before I finally locked my phone and shoved it into my pocket. For the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't focus on a single thing. Numbers blurred together on my computer screen. Emails piled up unanswered. My co-workers asked me simple questions, and I found myself staring at them for a few seconds before realizing they were waiting for a response. "If I were you, I'd find out who Claire has dinner with every Thursday." Who sends something like that? A jealous ex? Someone trying to ruin our relationship? A prank? Or someone who had watched me walk into a trap and finally decided I deserved to know? I wanted to believe it was nothing. Actually, that's not true. I needed it to be nothing, because the alternative meant the life I'd spent 6 years building could disappear in a single evening. When I got home, Claire was already there. She was sitting on the couch with her laptop open, comparing flower arrangements for the wedding reception. She looked up and smiled. "You're home." I walked over and kissed her. "How's wedding planning?" She rolled her eyes dramatically. "If I have to look at one more centerpiece, I might lose my mind." I laughed. "I'll support whatever flowers don't bankrupt us." She smiled, closed the laptop, and leaned against my shoulder. For a moment, everything felt normal again. The warmth of her hand in mine, the familiar scent of her perfume, the comfortable silence we'd shared for years. It almost convinced me that the message was nonsense. Almost. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined different possibilities. Maybe the anonymous account had mistaken Claire for someone else. Maybe she was secretly planning a surprise for me. Maybe dinner really was just work. My mind desperately searched for explanations that didn't end with betrayal. Morning came far too quickly. At breakfast, Claire looked exhausted. "I'll probably be late again tonight." I poured coffee into my mug. "Another campaign?" She nodded. "My boss is putting a lot of pressure on everyone." "I'm sorry." She smiled weakly. "It'll be over soon." Those words stayed with me. It'll be over soon. At the time, I assumed she meant the project. Later, I realized she could have meant something entirely different. Thursday finally arrived. The day mentioned in the anonymous message. I spent the entire morning debating with myself. Following your fiancé felt wrong. It felt dishonest. If she was innocent, I'd be violating the trust we'd spent years building. But if she wasn't, ignoring it wouldn't change the truth. Around 4 o'clock, I made a decision. I told my supervisor I wasn't feeling well and asked if I could leave early. He looked at me for a second. "You don't look great." "I've had a headache all day." "Go home. We'll finish this tomorrow." I thanked him and walked out before I could change my mind. Instead of driving home, I parked across the street from Claire's office building. The steering wheel felt slippery in my hands because my palms wouldn't stop sweating. I kept telling myself how ridiculous this was. She was probably going to walk out with coworkers. Maybe they'd all go to dinner together. Maybe I'd laugh at myself afterward and never mention it to anyone. 5:30 came. Employees began leaving the building. Groups of people laughed as they headed toward the parking lot. I checked every face. No Claire. 5:45. Still nothing. At exactly 6 o'clock, she appeared. She wasn't alone. A man stood beside a black SUV near the entrance. He looked to be in his mid-30s, well-dressed, confident. The moment Claire saw him, she smiled. Not the polite smile you give a coworker, the kind of smile reserved for someone you're genuinely excited to see. He stepped forward. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around her. She hugged him back, not briefly, not awkwardly, comfortably, naturally, like two people who had hugged each other many times before. I felt my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. Maybe they were relatives, old friends. I clung to every possible explanation. Then he opened the passenger door for her. She got into his SUV. I waited a few seconds before starting my truck. The last thing I wanted was for them to notice they were being followed. Traffic made it easier. I stayed several cars behind, pretending to be just another commuter heading home. After 20 minutes, they pulled into the parking lot of a small Italian restaurant on the other side of town. Not a chain restaurant, not somewhere crowded with business meetings. It was quiet, romantic, the kind of place couples visited for anniversaries. I parked across the street where I could see through the large front windows. Claire and the man were seated in a corner booth. A waiter poured them wine. They laughed together. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear while listening to him. Then he reached across the table. My entire body froze. He took her hand. She looked down for a second, then intertwined her fingers with his. It felt like someone had punched every bit of air out of my lungs. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. I kept hoping she'd pull her hand back. She never did. Dinner lasted almost 90 minutes. 90 minutes that felt like an entire lifetime. At one point, she laughed so hard, she leaned across the table and touched his arm. The exact same thing she'd done with me hundreds of times. Except this time, I was the stranger watching through a window. Eventually, they stood to leave. I should have driven away. I already knew enough. But something inside me needed absolute certainty. They walked toward the SUV. He opened her door again. Before she got in, he gently placed one hand against her cheek. Time seemed to stop. Then he kissed her. She kissed him back, slowly, comfortably, without surprise, without hesitation. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a first kiss. This was the kiss of two people already in a relationship. My hands tightened around the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember blinking. All I remember thinking was one sentence. She chose him. Every promise, every plan, every wedding invitation sitting on our kitchen counter, every conversation about children, every late-night dream about growing old together, in that single moment, none of it had been real to her. She climbed into the SUV. He smiled before walking around to the driver's side. I watched them disappear into traffic. I stayed parked exactly where I was for nearly half an hour. People walked past my truck. Cars came and went. The restaurant closed. I never moved. Eventually, my phone rang. Claire. I stared at her name on the screen until it stopped ringing. A few seconds later, another call, then a text. Still at work. I'll probably be home around 10. Love you. Love you. I read those two words over and over. Just an hour earlier, she had kissed another man. Now she was telling me she loved me. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. Not because she cheated, because she could lie so effortlessly, as if it were just another part of her day. I drove home in complete silence. Every traffic light felt unreal. Every familiar street suddenly looked different. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the wedding decorations we'd ordered had finally been delivered. Large boxes sat neatly beside the front door. White ribbons, table decorations, welcome signs with our names printed in elegant gold letters. Ethan and Claire, forever begins here. I stared at those words for what felt like forever. Then I carried every box inside, one by one. Not because I was excited anymore, but because I knew there would never be a wedding to decorate. I just hadn't figured out yet how I was going to tell the woman who had destroyed our future that I already knew everything. Claire walked through the front door a little after 10 that night. I heard her keys hit the small wooden bowl we kept on the entry table. A second later, she called out in the cheerful voice I had heard thousands of times. Hey babe, you still awake? I was sitting alone in the living room with every light turned off except the lamp beside the couch. Yeah, I answered. She walked in, set her purse on the chair, and smiled when she saw me. There you are. Then she frowned slightly. Why are you sitting in the dark? I couldn't sleep. She walked over and kissed my forehead. I'm sorry I'm so late. How was work? She didn't even pause. It was exhausting. Another lie. She slipped it into the conversation as naturally as saying good morning. Not a flicker of guilt crossed her face. I looked into her eyes, searching for some sign that she regretted what she'd done. There was nothing, just the same warm smile I'd fallen in love with years earlier. I saved you some dinner, I said quietly. She smiled. You're the best. As she reheated her food in the kitchen, I sat perfectly still, listening to ordinary sounds that suddenly felt unbearable. The microwave beeped, cabinets opened and closed, silverware clinked against a plate. Our home sounded exactly the same, but somehow it no longer felt like home. She came back into the living room, carrying her plate, and curled up on the opposite end of the couch. You've been quiet tonight. Just tired. She nodded. I know the feeling. For almost 20 minutes, we watched television together, or at least the television was on. Neither of us paid attention to it. I spent the entire time wondering how someone could sit 3 feet away from the person they claimed to love while hiding an entirely different relationship. Eventually, she yawned. I'm going to bed. I forced a smile. I'll be up in a little while. Don't stay up too late. I won't. She kissed me one last time before heading upstairs. The second I heard our bedroom door close, I buried my face in my hands. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there in complete silence until almost 1 in the morning. When I finally went upstairs, Claire was already asleep. At least she looked asleep. I stood beside the bed staring at her. For years I'd watched her sleep peacefully beside me. Now all I could think was, who are you? The next morning she acted exactly the same as always. She made coffee, complained that we were almost out of milk, asked if I wanted pancakes on Saturday. Every ordinary conversation felt surreal because I knew she was carefully maintaining a version of reality that no longer existed. I realized something then. If she'd hidden this for months, one dinner wasn't enough. I needed to know everything, not because I wanted to torture myself, because once I ended the relationship, I never wanted to wonder if I'd misunderstood anything. I wanted certainty. Over the next 3 days, I paid attention to details I'd ignored before. She smiled every time a particular notification appeared on her phone. She carried a second charger in her purse I'd never seen before. She suddenly started going for evening walks after dinner. Every explanation sounded reasonable until you looked at all of them together. Saturday morning, Claire announced she was meeting her maid of honor to finalize bridesmaid dresses. I'll probably be gone most of the afternoon. Have fun, she smiled. I won't be too long. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I opened the drawer where we kept our old tablet. Months earlier, Claire had borrowed it while her laptop was being repaired. She'd logged into several accounts. Apparently, she'd forgotten to log out of one. I wasn't proud of what I did next, but by then, I already knew I wasn't invading the privacy of an innocent person. I was uncovering the truth from someone who had already destroyed ours. The email inbox looked ordinary at first. Wedding confirmations, online shopping receipts, promotional emails. Then I noticed a folder simply labeled Travel. Inside was a hotel reservation, 2 guests, 1 room, 3 nights. The reservation had been made almost 2 months earlier. The dates weren't for our honeymoon. They were for a weekend. Claire had told me she was attending a marketing conference in another city. My stomach dropped. I clicked on the confirmation. Guest 1, Claire Morgan. Guest 2, Daniel Brooks. Daniel. So now I finally had his name. There were more emails, restaurant reservations, concert tickets, a receipt for matching spa appointments. Each one felt like another piece of broken glass. Every romantic experience I thought belonged to us, she had been sharing with someone else. Then I found something that hurt even more, an email containing photographs. Daniel had sent her pictures from one of their weekend trips. In one photo, they stood on a hiking trail with their arms around each other. In another, they were sitting on a beach watching the sunset. I recognized the beach immediately. It was the same beach where I'd proposed. She had taken another man there. I actually had to close the tablet for a moment because I suddenly felt sick. After a few minutes, I opened it again. There was one final email. No photos, no attachments, just a message from Daniel. I hate pretending you belong to someone else. I wish you'd just tell him so we can finally be together. My chest tightened. Claire had replied only a few minutes later. I know. Just give me a little more time. Everything will work itself out. Everything will work itself out. I stared at that sentence for several minutes. She wasn't trapped. She wasn't confused. She wasn't trying to end the affair. She was trying to manage 2 relationships until she decided which future suited her best. I closed the tablet. For the first time since discovering the affair, I stopped hoping there was some misunderstanding. There wasn't. This was deliberate, planned, sustained. She had looked me in the eyes every day while building another life with someone else. That afternoon, I drove to a copy shop. I printed every email, every hotel reservation, every photograph, every receipt, every message. The employee handed me the neatly stacked pages inside a simple manila folder. He smiled politely. Anything else today? I looked down at the folder. No. I almost added, this is the folder that ends my engagement. Instead, I thanked him and walked away. That evening, Claire came home carrying shopping bags. She looked excited. Guess what? What? I found the perfect gifts for our parents. She held up 2 beautifully wrapped boxes. I know we said we weren't doing parent gifts, but I couldn't help myself. I looked at her for a long moment. The woman standing in front of me was buying sentimental wedding gifts, while secretly planning a future with another man. The contradiction was almost impossible to understand. She noticed my expression. What? Nothing. You've been acting strange all week. I've just had a lot on my mind. She stepped closer. Is this about work? I almost laughed. If only she knew. That night, after she fell asleep, I carried the folder into my home office and placed it neatly in the center of the desk. I sat there until nearly 3 in the morning, not deciding whether to forgive her. That decision had already been made. I was deciding how to end 6 years of my life with dignity. I could expose her at the wedding. I could send every guest copies of the evidence. I could confront Daniel. I could post everything online. For a few angry moments, every option sounded satisfying. Then I imagined my parents, Her parents, our families, hundreds of guests arriving expecting to celebrate love, only to witness humiliation instead. No, they hadn't done anything wrong. They didn't deserve to become part of our disaster. By sunrise, my mind was finally clear. There would be no dramatic revenge, no screaming, no public embarrassment, just the truth, quiet, simple, final. I looked at the engagement ring on my finger. In less than 24 hours, it wouldn't belong to me anymore. The next morning, Claire woke up in an unusually good mood. She walked into the kitchen wearing one of my old college hoodies, humming to herself while making coffee. "If the weather stays like this," she said with a smile, "our wedding pictures are going to be perfect." I looked at her for a long moment. For just a second, I imagined saying nothing, going through with the wedding, pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen, pretending I didn't know about Daniel. But then I remembered the restaurant, the hotel reservations, the emails, the photographs, the lies. No, the woman standing in front of me wasn't the woman I had asked to marry me. She had disappeared months ago, or maybe she had never existed at all. "Claire," I said calmly. "Yeah? We need to talk." The smile on her face faded. "Is everything okay? I think you already know the answer." She slowly placed her coffee mug on the counter. "You're starting to scare me." I walked into the dining room. The manila folder was already sitting on the table. She followed me inside. Her eyes immediately landed on the folder. "What is this?" "Open it." She hesitated. Then she pulled out the first photograph. I watched every bit of color disappear from her face. She flipped to the second page, then the third, the hotel reservation, the emails, the receipts. Her hands began shaking so badly that several papers slipped onto the floor. For nearly a full minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered the words almost every betrayed partner eventually hears. "I can explain." I slowly shook my head. "No." Tears filled her eyes almost instantly. "Ethan, no. I never wanted you to find out like this." I stared at her in disbelief. "That's your first concern?" She covered her mouth and started crying. "I know how bad this looks." "Looks?" My voice remained calm, almost frighteningly calm. "It doesn't look like anything, Claire. It is exactly what it is." She collapsed into one of the dining room chairs. "It wasn't supposed to happen." "When exactly?" She looked confused. "What? When wasn't it supposed to happen? The first lie? The first kiss? The first hotel? The first weekend trip? The first time you told him you wished you could be together?" She couldn't answer. Every question seemed to make her smaller. I was confused. "You were engaged." "I know. You weren't confused. You made choices." She buried her face in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. It went exactly as far as you allowed it to." Silence filled the room. After a while, she looked up at me. "I still love you." I let out a quiet breath. "No, I do. You loved having options." She started crying harder. "Please don't say that." "Then tell me I'm wrong." She couldn't. Instead, she reached across the table for my hand. I quietly pulled it away. That seemed to hurt her more than anything I'd said. I was going to end it. "When?" "Soon." "When?" "I don't know." "No." I leaned forward. "You know exactly when." She stared at me. "You were never going to tell me. You were going to marry me. You were going to smile through your vows. You were going to wear a white dress while carrying on another relationship." She began shaking her head. "No. If I hadn't found out..." I stopped speaking. I didn't need to finish the sentence. She lowered her eyes to the floor. That silence answered everything. If I had never received that anonymous message, we would have been married. That realization hurt more than any photograph ever could. I slowly removed the engagement ring from my finger. The tiny diamond caught the morning sunlight for just a moment. 6 years, reduced to one small circle of gold. I placed it gently on top of the folder. "The wedding is cancelled." Her head snapped up. "No." "Yes. Please. There isn't anything left to save." She rushed around the table and wrapped her arms around me. I didn't hug her back. She cried against my chest, exactly the way she had the day I proposed. Except this time, the tears meant nothing. "I'm begging you. I'll quit my job. I'll go to therapy. I'll block him. I'll do anything." I carefully stepped backward until her arms slipped away. "You should have done all of that before you cheated." Not after you got caught, that was the difference. She wasn't fighting for our relationship, she was fighting the consequences of losing it. Within an hour, she had packed 2 suitcases. Before leaving, she stood in the doorway, looking around the house we'd shared for 3 years. I never wanted this. I looked at her quietly. Neither did I. She waited, maybe expecting me to stop her, maybe hoping I'd change my mind. I didn't. She picked up her bags, walked out the front door, and just like that, the woman I'd planned to spend the rest of my life with disappeared from it. The following days were harder than I can properly describe. Canceling a wedding isn't like canceling a dinner reservation. Every phone call reopened the wound. The venue manager asked if we'd like to reschedule. No. The florist asked if there had been an emergency. Something like that. Friends called asking what had happened. Some cried. Some were angry. Some couldn't believe it. The hardest conversations were with our parents. My mother hugged me without saying a word. She didn't ask for details. She simply sat beside me while I cried for the first time since discovering the truth. Claire's parents came to my house a few days later. Her father looked like he'd aged 10 years. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I don't know where we failed." I shook his hand. "You didn't fail. She made her own decisions." He nodded slowly. "I still wanted to tell you that. I never blamed them. Good parents can raise children who still make terrible choices." A week later, one of Claire's friends called me. She hesitated before speaking. "I thought you should know." "What?" "Daniel left her." I closed my eyes. "When?" 2 days after you cancelled the wedding." "Why?" "He said if she could lie to the man she was engaged to for months, she'd eventually lie to him too." I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel satisfied. I just sat quietly for a long time. Trust, the one thing she'd thrown away. Neither of us ended up with it. The months that followed were dedicated to rebuilding my life. I started therapy, not because I was weak, because I refused to let someone else's betrayal define the rest of my future. I spent more time with my family, started hiking again, returned to hobbies I'd abandoned during wedding planning. Slowly, very slowly, the pain became smaller. Not gone, just smaller. Almost a year later, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. "I know you probably hate me." I knew immediately who it was. Another message arrived. "Losing you was the biggest mistake of my life." Then another. "I think about you every day. I wish I could go back. I'd do anything for another chance." There was a time when those words would have shattered me. Now, they simply made me sad. Not because I missed her, because I realized she finally understood what she'd thrown away. I typed one reply. "I genuinely hope you become the person you wanted me to believe you already were. I forgive you, but I will never come back." I pressed send. Then I blocked the number, not out of anger, out of peace. 3 years have passed since then. Today I'm married to an incredible woman named Emma. The first thing she ever gave me wasn't expensive. It was consistency. She says what she means. She does what she says. She has never once made me wonder where I stand in her life. People often ask if I regret those 6 years with Claire. I don't, because those years taught me a lesson I might never have learned otherwise. Love without trust isn't love, it's hope, and hope alone can never hold a marriage together. If you're listening to my story while trying to decide whether to ignore the red flags in your own relationship, I want you to remember something. Real love doesn't require constant excuses. It doesn't survive on promises that only appear after someone gets caught. And it certainly doesn't ask you to sacrifice your self-respect just to avoid being alone. Walking away from the woman I loved was the hardest decision I have ever made, but staying would have been the biggest mistake of my life. Sometimes the ending you never wanted becomes the beginning you never imagined. And looking back now, I realize something that once would have sounded impossible. She didn't ruin my future. She revealed the future I was about to walk into. Because of that painful truth, I was given the chance to build a life with someone who actually chose me every single day. And that is a gift I'll never take for granted again.